Iran is the last stumbling block, right?
Right. And you mentioned again, which I never made this connection, I was annoyed at myself, that Israel actually wants America to lose the war against Iran because it destabilizes Iran, not the same way, but also, like, so many Americans have this idea that America and Israel, oh, we're allies, our greatest ally. But if America loses and we lose our spot as the global empire, then it just gives Israel the opportunity to now dominate the Middle East without our hands meddling in it. But they don't actually, one, they don't give us anything, but two, they don't, what do they stand to gain from having us as or America as the global empire?
Right. So these eschatologies, they agree on certain things, okay? So they agree that you need to create Pax Judaica for the end times to happen. They also agree that America will not be involved in the end times. So what you need to do is you need to remove America from the equation. And the way you do that is you start this war in Iran, you make this war unwinnable, and it destroys American military capacity in the Middle East, and then it triggers a civil war in America, and so America's distracted from the Middle East, okay? That's a plan.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so what are your predictions now, your short-term predictions? There's been major developments. You've been speaking about this for several years, and your lectures got a lot of this correct. What do you see coming in the rest of this year? Is the war with Iran, how soon is that, and what else do you predict?
Okay, so look, everything's leading to this war in Iran, okay? So look, I mean, they were trying to win this war on the cheap, right? So you go back to the 12-day war last year, and the Israelis really believe that we decapitate the regime. You know, if we kill these generals and these officers and these clerics within Iran, this will rally the people, and the people will naturally overthrow the regime, okay? And then what they recognized was the regime is far more resilient, far more cohesive, far more determined than they actually imagined, okay? So the 12-day war was a disaster. And then if you go back to early this year, you know, during New Year's, Netanyahu visited Trump in Mar-a-Lago. What happened right afterwards is that currency speculators working on behalf of Mossad and CIA, they destroyed the rial, the Iranian currency, and this caused massive economic unrest in Iran, which translated into protests. You know, these merchants were protesting in Iran. And this is the classic color revolution playbook, right? Where you cause economic malaise, you have some organic protests, and then you send in provocateurs in order to shoot police officers, okay? So they killed a lot of security officers. A lot of money was flowing in the country. They brought in some Kurds as insurgents to cause more unrest. And then you control social media, right? You inflame people through social media. But the Iranian response, the Iranians actually had a counter strategy. And what they did was they shut off the internet. When you shut the internet, then these protesters, because a lot of them are Mossad, right? They're forced to use Starlink. But then when you use Starlink, they're able now to locate where you are. So they were able to take down a lot of these cells. So, you know, they killed a lot of civilians, but they also killed a lot of Mossad operatives in Iran. So this has diminished Israeli capacity in Iran. Okay, people don't really appreciate this, but they've been building these networks for years through cash, they've been investing a lot into these insurgent networks in Iran for a number of years, and now a lot of these networks are destroyed. Right. So the last option for the Israelis to win a war against Iran is to stage a false flag operation, and then get the Americans to attack Iran. I don't know what this false flag will look like, okay? But we can expect a false flag operation. What's happening around the world this weekend are these protests calling for the overthrow of the Iranian regime. I'm not sure if you've seen these large protests everywhere around the world, okay? But it's clearly being staged by the Americans and the Israelis.
And Mike Pompeo, former CIA director under Trump's first administration, he tweeted saying that these protests, this came from him, his Twitter account saying that these protests were subverted by Mossad/CIA agents. So this is true. Do you think that Americans have to worry about another 9/11, like a false, well, not saying that was a false flag attack, but do we expect that? Because they always need a catalyst to go to war. Pearl Harbor was the catalyst to bomb Japan, and 9/11 was the catalyst in order to go into the Middle East, right? In order to get support. And again, there was an attack recently at Hanukkah, or during Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah in Australia, and they said it was a Muslim guy. And then a Muslim man ended up stopping the shooter. They found out that the shooter was taking trips back and forth from the Philippines. He had weird intelligence ties. Do you think that America has to worry about a false flag to that extent?
I think the false flag will probably happen in the Middle East. What will probably happen is a U.S. base gets hit. It'll be very similar to the USS Liberty in 1967, right? And it's a playbook because the Gulf token, like the Vietnam War.
Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
That's right. So I think that's the most likely situation. And Americans are setting this up because they have all these terror strike groups in the Arabian Sea right now patrolling, right? So it's very easy to stage a false flag attack.
The Gerald Ford, I see that U.S. military, one, they said to be careful about leaving flights in Iran right now to Americans. They sent out an email. And the other one, I'm seeing military, people in the Navy are hearing that they might have to be deployed to the Gerald Ford. That's the ship that patrols around the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Another thing I will say is the people running the world today are different from the ones running the world during 9/11, okay? 9/11 was a spectacularly done job, okay? Give credit to these guys, like George H.W. Bush. He was clearly the mastermind behind 9/11, right? This is a guy who spent decades in intelligence, and he was able to build this network in order to pull off 9/11, okay? It was a really sophisticated act of theater. The guys in charge now aren't like that. They're kind of lazy, they're kind of incompetent, they're indifferent, they're hubris, okay? So So it's not going to be as elaborate as 9/11. And I don't think it'll happen on the American homeland because I think that Americans right now are much more skeptical. They're sort of ready for it, okay? But it'll much more likely happen overseas where American soldiers are targeted and they'll blame it on the Iranians. It's much easier to do that than something
Right.
on
What about Israel bombed Doha? They bombed Qatar very recently, which is an American ally, but there was literal no outrage at all from American people, especially coming from our greatest ally, bombing another one of our allies. If there's going to be a false flag in the Middle East, then how come there was no? Is it all just media manipulation?
I think it's just media manipulation. The other thing that to remember is that these regimes in the GCC, right, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, they're all co-opted by the Israelis. They're all working together. They're all like colonies of the Israelis.
What about Saudi? I was talking to Nick Fuentes the other day, and he said that Saudi has separated from being the Israeli ally that they were several years ago. Is this true?
No, it's all theater. So if you look at the history of the Middle East, okay, it was created by the British Empire, right? So the House of Saud was installed as a puppet regime by the British Empire. And so then the question is like, who is the House of Saud? If you actually go into some of the history, okay, so this is 2003, the Americans go into Baghdad and they capture all the state systems of the Iraqi regime, okay? And when they go over the files of the Iraqi intelligence agency, the Iraqis were actually convinced that the House of Saud were crypto Jews, that these people, the House of Saud, these were crypto Jews. They were Sabbatean Frankists, okay? Yeah. So this goes back to Sabbath Zevi. In 1666, he declares he's a Messiah. And then he is threatened by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, saying that, either your head or the turban. Okay, you either convert to Islam or I will take your head. And Sabbath Zevi converts. And then 300 families called the Dome. It's called Chernko in the language.
Turks.
But they convert with the Turks. Okay, and the Dome are important because the Dome then aligned with the British Empire to overthrow the Ottoman Empire. And the Dome are the ones who are responsible for the Young Turk movement for Ataturk. Okay, but not only that, but the Dome then spread around the region, and they also become the House of Saud. Okay, so that's the origin of these families in the Middle East.
Is this proven about that? I love Saudi Arabia. I travel there all the time. But what's the evidence of that?
Well, I mean, again, I don't actually use documentary evidence in my classes. I use a lot of first principle thinking. Okay, but I'm trying to explain why the House of Saud is in charge, who put them in power, and why they were put into power, and who the British Empire would trust to put into power. Okay, so so the British Empire put the House of Saud into power. Why would they do that? And well, they would do that because they know the House of Saud would be loyal to the British Empire. And why would they be loyal? Because the House of Saud is compromised and they're secretly crypto Jews, and therefore they have no choice but to align with a greater power, whether it's the British Empire or the American Empire afterwards. So again, I don't have evidence, but I'm saying this is what makes the most sense for me, right? Because what I do is I create frameworks, I create models of the world, and then I test it, I validate it by testing it, by making predictions about it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So my prediction is that Saudi Arabia and Israel, the conflict right now is all theater. And if Pax Judaica were to arrive in Saudi Arabia, it would be a very important part of this Pax Judaica. And the question then is, why do you have this conflict between Saudi Arabia and Israel? And I think the reason why is, if there's a war, then Iran, the Iranian strategy would create economic warfare. Okay, so it would destroy the economies of the Middle East, which would force the world to get involved in this war. Right? That's the only way that the Iranians could possibly win this war, by creating as much economic pain as possible for the rest of the world. And you do that by the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, right? Because they have drones and ballistic missiles. And so Saudi Arabia is trying to hedge against this. It's trying to play the victim and says, listen, we're your best friends. We're the ones trying to stop the Israelis from attacking you. So why blow up our oil fields?
Mm-hmm. Do you ever worry about travel? Because I visit Saudi all the time, and people make allegations that Saudi is killing journalists. And I've seen you've traveled to Saudi before. Has any of this ever? Are you banned from any countries? How does this affect your personal life?
This is something that I don't really worry about, and the reason why is I'm not actually embedded into power networks. Okay, so you look at someone like Charlie Kirk, right? He was getting money from these guys. If you're getting money from these guys, then you're bought by them. So if you speak out, if you don't toe the line, then it's considered betrayal, right? So I don't take money from these guys. I don't know who these guys are. So I'm this random high school teacher, and I have a YouTube channel, right? I'm this random YouTuber. So they're not interested in me. They don't care about me.
So are you insinuating that Charlie Kirk, as soon as he started saying that October 7th was an inside job and that Epstein was an Israeli spy, are you insinuating that the people that give him money to run Turning Point took him out because he went against their narrative, and that it wasn't actually Tyler Robinson, somebody who was in a relationship with a transgender?
Well, yeah. Yes, I am insinuating that, and I think the evidence is pretty. It's pretty clear. I think in many ways the Charlie Kirk assassination was supposed to be like 9/11. Because remember, they had all these like Pentagon military ads prepared for right after Charlie Kirk. The entire intention was to drum up this national sentiment, to draft young men into fighting for Israel. And then when it was reported, there was this backlash and they turned against it. Okay, but it's a very similar situation to 9/11.
Okay, and going back to crypto Jews, which is the terminology for undercover Jews, so many have had to convert, right? Actually, I found out recently that my grandfather was essentially half of one. He immigrated to Haiti after World War II, married my black grandmother, and we didn't know that my whole life. But there's so many of these people, and especially Zabbatai Zevi is one of the biggest examples of that. So he claimed to be the Jewish Messiah in 1666, and so he changed that hierarchy within Judaism, because after they were expelled, when the first temple was destroyed, the rabbis took power of the Jewish faith. And so Zabbatai Zevi comes along, claims to be the Jewish Messiah, and most people accept this, correct, that he's the Messiah?
Well, a third.
A third of the Jews accept that.
A third of all Jews in the world at that time, yes.
Okay, 33%. And yeah, so and then he gets rid. Is he successful at changing the rabbi hierarchy within Judaism?
Right. Okay. So we should understand Zabbatai Zevi as a populist uprising, right? Because at this time in history, Jews are being split throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, and the rabbi is telling the Jewish people, "Don't worry, have faith. The Messiah will return when God wills it." And the peasants are like, "That's easy for you to say because you're a rabbi and you are working alongside the European elite, the European nobility that's suppressing us." Okay. So there's a lot of anger at the rabbis, and Zabbatai Zevi, his emergence is, let's reject the authority of the rabbis because they're part of the oppressive class, and let us convert and forgive those who converted, right? Because in the Jewish tradition at that time, the worst crime that you can do is to convert to Christianity or Islam, which is what millions of Jews have done in the past, right? And so the question then is like, how do you understand what they did? And the Jews are like, well, the rabbis are like, well, they'll just burn in hell, right? Don't be like them because all of them will burn in hell. But the problem is that the Jewish faith is one of blood, right? So can you like stomach the idea
the Jewish faith is one of blood?
Yeah, meaning like you're born into the faith, right?
Oh, okay.
It's like don't say it from.
I misunderstood.
Okay,
right. Your mother has to be Jewish.
Right.
You need to be Jewish.
That's right. So like the idea is like your grandfather's going to burn in hell because he converted to Islam, right? I mean, like are you going?
No, he didn't. My family's all Catholic.
No.
But you would convert if you switch. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but so the rabbis are saying that if you are born Jewish and you convert to Christianity or Islam, you will burn in hell for all of eternity.
Right.
I'm saying like as a person, as a Jewish person who didn't convert, are you okay with your grandfather who did convert burning in hell, right? You're probably not. And so what Zabbatai Zevi is, guys, it doesn't matter if you convert or not. What matters is what you truly believe. What matters is your individual faith. That's what matters. Okay? And he showed that by converting himself. And so so remember, Jesus came to redeem us from the original sin. Well, that's what Zabbatai Zevi did as well. He came to redeem the Jews from the original sin of conversion. And so now you converted. It doesn't matter anymore. You are still a Jew because your blood determines your identity and your faith is what matters. Okay? So you can convert, but as long as you secretly believe in the Jewish faith, you're still a Jew. Okay? And that's the idea of crypto Jews. It's okay to insult Jews. It's okay to go against every Jewish tradition. It's okay, but if secretly you still believe you're a Jew, you're a Jew. God will know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I did ask you this before, but I think this question, maybe I should phrase it a little more directly. So what is the overlap between Frankists, the Rothschilds, and Judaism?
Okay, all right, so there's competing interpretations, okay? So the Rothschilds are Frankists, okay? We know that. The Rothschilds believe in the Frankists, okay? As well as the Epsteins, okay? So that's overlap. So we look at Jeffrey Epstein and the Rothschild. Why were they close? Because they're all part of the Frankist movement, okay? So there are two interpretations of Frankism. The first interpretation, which is the mainstream interpretation, is that Frankism is a heresy, okay? Because what Frankism argues is justification by sin, right? And the idea is that this world that we live in is a fake world, right? And this fake world is run by evil people, Satan, who impose ideas that make no sense. For example, the idea of sin, right? So for example, you shouldn't eat pork and you can't work on Saturdays, it's Sabbath, right? Wait a minute here. That makes no sense whatsoever. Aren't we, as divine beings who are connected to God, aren't we able to reason for ourselves what is right and what is not right? And how do you prove your faith then? You prove your faith by rejecting the idea of sin and putting your total faith in God. And you do that by breaking taboos, right? Including incest. So when you commit an act of incest, what you're doing is you are literally showing that your faith in God is stronger than the conventions of men, right? So Jacob Frank has this great saying where, what I teach you, this is a thing that 10,000 men can't lift, right? This oppresses 10,000 men. But this one thing you can live with a finger, okay? It's light as a feather. It's the idea of taboo and sin, okay? We've been oppressed by the idea of morality, by the idea of sin, by the idea of taboos. And once you free your mind, then you're capable of anything. You're capable of divinity, okay? So that's the main teaching of Jacob Frank. And Jacob Frank is one of the founders of the Illuminati, along with Mayer Rothschild. Okay, so Rothschild is a Frankist family. The Frankists are considered a heresy of the Jewish faith. But then there's another interpretation, which is that the Frankism is just a natural extension of the Jewish faith, because the Jewish faith is one based on superiority, racial superiority, right? So like the Jews are just a inherently superior people to everyone else to go on. Because they are God's chosen people, and therefore they should be allowed to do whatever they want to demonstrate that they're superior, right? Including breaking taboos. So there are two interpretations. The mainstream interpretation by the rabbis is they're heresy. Let's never talk about them because they're evil. The other interpretation is they're just a natural evolution or the logical conclusion of the Jewish faith.
So, what do you think is the real interpretation? My analysis is that the chosen people versus the Goyim ideology is a misunderstanding of what God wanted. So that the Jews, when they were told that you're the chosen people, what it meant was you are the one chosen, and the word of God was revealed to your language to spread the word of God throughout the world, right? And I think the comparison you could see in Islam is like the Quran was revealed in Arabic, and I guess the Arab people were the ones that revealed the message. Muhammad, peace be upon him, was an Arab man, or before the time you could argue Semite, but the people of this region and their language, this is who was chosen to get this message, right? And he corrected that and said, do not worship me, do not worship Arabia or this land, worship God and God alone. Do you think that the Jews misinterpreted what was meant by chosen people? Were they meant to be chosen to spread the word of God? But when they first had that crisis of faith, when their temple was destroyed, that's when things went the wrong direction.
Yeah. So, if you look at Jewish history, you look at the history of the Israelites, the king of David, that's a very open, cosmopolitan, diverse society that was actually polytheistic. If you look at the archaeological evidence, the Israelites at that time were polytheistic, and they embraced all different gods, including Baal, Asherah, Yahweh. Okay, but if you're God's chosen people, if you are chosen to be the light of nations, to show how to live as a people, how to be a moral individual, how to be a good person, how do you explain these thousands of years of destruction, persecution, enslavement, right? I mean, like you're really God's chosen people. Why was your temple destroyed, which is the house of God? Why were you enslaved and put into captivity in Babylon? Why were you, why are you being massacred? Right? So you have these thousands of years of history, and this creates the idea of cognitive dissonance, right? You have this idea, which is like we are God's chosen people, and we are meant to be a good example to everyone else. But then you have these thousands of years of history of persecution, and so the only way to justify this is that God is testing us. God wants us to do great things, right? And so we need to strive to build a better world. We need to build a better world. We need to create Israel and have Israel not to be the light of nations, but to be the ruler of nations. And again, this is my speculation, right? Because I don't know. I'm not Jewish. I'm saying like you have this kind of dissonance where you are God's chosen people, and then you have this 1,000 years persecution, right? And how do you explain these 1,000 years persecution? Well, it's to test you. It's to temper you. It's to build you up, to make you strong enough to actually rule the world.
Mm-hmm. And Sabbatai Zevi. So, earlier in your lesson about Sabbatai Zevi, I think the lecture was called A Faith of Evil. You mentioned how the Spanish Inquisition, right, that was around 1492?
No, that was the year of the expulsion. So 1492 is when the Jews were expelled from Spain. Mm-hmm. And this was a traumatic event for Jews, because if there's one place in the world at this time that Jews felt safe and at home, it was Spain, okay? Spain is the origin of the Sephardic Jews, right?
Under Muslim rule, because Muslims allowed for faiths to coexist.
Exactly, right? But then when Spain was reconquered by the Christians were not as tolerant, and the Christians were like, you either convert or you leave, okay? So a lot of people were kicked out, and they were sent to the Ottoman Empire, which did welcome them, but then a lot converted. And this is a very, very traumatic event in the Jewish faith, which led ultimately to Sabbatai Zevi, right? Because now you have a problem, like, what do you do with these millions of people, of Jews who converted to another faith? Do we forgive them? Do we punish them? What do we do?
Okay. So the theory now that I'm seeing, you didn't mention this in your lecture, but I was looking it up during it, was that Christopher Columbus, he was expelled, or he was in Spain during the Spanish Inquisition. Do you believe in the theory that he was actually a crypto-Sephardic Jew, and that he was there to find the New World in order to find a project for Pax Judaica?
Look, I'll tell you something really, really funny, but a lot of the people involved in the Spanish Inquisition, the Grand Inquisitors,
also Jews,
were crypto Jews. Yeah.
So they were. Yeah. So what's the point of that? Why kick out their own people?
I mean, it's all part of God's plan, right? I mean, the people are being molded; they're being tested. I mean, like, what matters is survival of the people. What matters is survival of the faith. Okay, like for 1,000 years, different empires have tried to destroy the Jewish faith. The Romans were horrific in their crimes, right? That was a Holocaust, really. Like 3 wars that killed millions of Jews. That was a Holocaust. You have the Babylonians. So you have these different empires that try to destroy the Jews. So what matters, okay? God's real plan is for the Jewish faith to persist, even though it may involve sacrifice of millions of Jews as well, right? So what matters is that the elite survive, because the elite are the transmitters of this culture. And if it means that the elite have to convert and then sacrifice their people, well, then that's part of God's plan.
Okay. So do you think that Christopher Columbus was a crypto Jew?
I think it's possible. I haven't looked into. Yeah.
Right, but ultimately it's the small percent, the 1% of the elite that are in control, playing both sides, and essentially a lot of them are Frankists. They are trying to use God's will, or to act like they are God on earth.
Yep, because only they know the true plan, right? Only they have the courage to implement God's plan. Because if God's plan involves the death of like 99% of humanity, like, are you okay with doing God's will, right? They are, because they're strong, because they have real faith. We're not. We're just ordinary people. Mm-hmm. So we're cattle, right? So we should criticize them.
Right. And there's a lot more I could. Okay, we talked about communism and your predictions. So, okay, the one that I watched 2 nights ago about Islamic Empire.